Okay, cool. Yeah, this is Dustin. One, I want to appreciate all of y'all for coming out. If you're in the wrong place, please, at the bottom corner of the screen, on the right side of the screen, is the exit door. Hopefully none of y'all use that right now and you're in the right place. But just want to, yeah, welcome you to the space and say, like, you know, you can do what you need to, or like prefer while you're here. I don't think we have like any slides whatsoever. Most of this will just be us in conversation with Brittany, Rich, and Evan. So if you need to step away, please do that. Move around your space, lay down if you need to. We do have English, the ASL interpretation. If you need multi-pin access, I think Etta is the host, so please just DM Etta. Etta can make you the co-host. If you need that, outside of that, we'll spotlight the interpreters. And if there's any like issues that you have, any questions you have around like the tech and access, you can always DM me. We have the automated captions as well. You can turn that on by just going to show subtitle or view full transcript, which is in the bottom corner of your screen, bottom right corner. And yeah, I think I'll pass it over to Etta. Again, yeah, if there's any questions for real, just, you know, raise them as you need to. We view access as something that's collective. It's not something we can grant to people. And if there's a barrier for you, most likely it is for somebody else. So we'll pause and get things figured out in the event that that does happen.
Thanks, Dustin. And can we do that in action right now? This is Etta. Can you please make Cheyenne the host? And then also make sure the captions are enabled. I don't know if I wasn't really prepared to do tech stuff, so I feel unprepared on that.
Hey, Etta, just can you make me host and then I can do
And
it?
I did. I thought I'm looking. Oh, make host. Okay, you host.
You can hand me that.
You can plug it into the dongle if you want.
I don't.
Okay. You good? We good, Dustin? Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Hi, I'm Etta. And so I'm going to introduce Let's Get Free. So we are a group based in Pittsburgh. We started about 9 years ago, and we work with primarily women and trans people sentenced to life without parole in Pennsylvania. And a lot of our programs and initiatives sort of revolve around that. We are not gender exclusive. We do work with people of all genders, but we prioritize and highlight and really focus on women and trans people. So how we came to be interested in guaranteed basic income was when Avis Lee, our co-founder, was released from a life sentence almost a year and a half ago. We created a job for her. We wrote a grant and we got a job for her, and she was our highest paid person ever in our organization, which is primarily grassroots, mostly volunteer. And in the past 3 years, I think, a couple of us were receiving monthly stipends to continue the work. So when Avis came home, we had a job for her. And part of that is like, you need a job when you come home on parole. It's like, you get a lot of pressure. If you don't have a job, you just get a lot of stress and a lot of pressure. And it's like kind of like a requirement. So we wanted to make sure that Avis had that. And then through that experience, we realized that we really didn't have the infrastructure as an organization to have an employee. And that was like not how we were orientated, because we just kept thinking like, oh, do we just, I remember complaining to Dustin once at a letter writing thing, like, oh, do we just keep making more jobs? You know, it just seemed like, how do we hold this? Like, we're so small. And then, and also when people come home from like 30, 40 years in prison, it's a lot. And a lot of people do that, I know, want to hit the ground running, as they say. They want to get involved in a lot of stuff. They want to work. And I think it should be at their pace and their option, and they shouldn't be forced by the parole or whoever to like super get a job really fast. That's kind of an aside. So I came across the Community Love Project from the National Council of Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And that was this guaranteed basic income program that they were giving monthly payments to 20 women, 4 of them incarcerated, over a year. So I got really excited about that idea. And I was like, maybe that's something we can do. And so now I'm going to pass it to Kai to talk about a softer landing.
Thanks, Etta. This is Kai, and I am one of the co-coordinators with Etta and Dustin. And so Softer Landing is a guaranteed basic income initiative. And so what guaranteed basic income is a monthly stipend to help folks maintain a standard of living that's above the poverty line. And at Let's Get Free, we've been raising money to pilot a guaranteed basic income program that's specifically for formerly incarcerated folks who have a connection with Let's Get Free. And so a Softer Landing will distribute recurring cash payments without any strings attached to a number of formerly incarcerated people. And this initiative will last for 1 year and is prioritizing women returning home from long sentences. And if you're wondering why it's been named a Softer Landing, this is because coming home from prison is hard, period. And then even if you have a lot of support, coming home from prison is still very hard. A term that is used in some circles is financial incarceration. And so this is the idea that even after you leave prison, someone would enter financial incarceration, so still being incarcerated based on not having funds and a means to a certain quality of life. And so some reasons for that is that folks have to pay to be on parole. Folks have to pay for urine tests, often are ordered to pay court fees and restitution fees. And then also often due to having a record, there are barriers to employment, there's barriers to housing, there's barriers to education. And additionally, folks can be excluded from social welfare programs due to having a record. And then finally, as Etta kind of already touched upon, there isn't the space to for an individual to gather their bearings, to readjust after coming home. And essentially there isn't the space to land after coming home. And so then our goal with this guaranteed basic income program is to provide a softer landing to the folks coming home. So that's my little piece about a softer landing. And then I think I'm passing it back to Dustin.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Kai. And this is Dustin. I think we might be switching interpreters. Cool. All right. So it's like all 4 of us spotlit. This is Dustin. Yeah, so we want to just like get right into it. We don't have like a lot of time here. and just wanted to say like, yo, like when we were, coming together and attempting to figure out how do we do like these direct cash payments to people, like we started researching and like finding out that like one, there's not a lot of examples that are easily accessible for people. And the ones that are like really controlled by the state in some sense, like the local governments that are doing them, at least the ones that are publicized. So we started reaching out to like people in our own communities or making connections in order to learn more. So I thought of Rich. Rich is somebody like, I've been with or been in contact with for a few years now. Rich is somebody out of Chicago that does like GBI programs. I knew about it because they equity and transformation, they like put things out publicly about it, that in the informal economy. So that was like a natural connection. And then Evan, who is also here today, is like connected to me through somebody I work with at my job, which is People's Hub, Cheyenne, who does solidarity economy organizing in New York. And Etta then ran into Brittany
Wait, I want to tell.
during the uprising.
Wait, let me tell, please. Okay, so Avis Lee, Ricky Lee Olds, and I went to the Poor People's March. And it was right before July 4th, which was our launch of Softer Landing. And so we were getting ready to launch the Softer Landing, and Avis and I are walking around with our cool signs, and we see Brittany in the middle of the Poor People's Campaign March with a guaranteed basic income huge banner. And I was like, OMG, we want to start one. Can I talk to you? And she engaged me and like answered all my questions for like 10 minutes. And I was so happy. I felt spiritually affirmed that we were on the correct path. And now Brittany Pope is here from Bread for the City from DC. And we're gonna let you start first, Brittany, to please share about your cool programs.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Etta. And again, running into you at that march was definitely a highlight of the summer. It was so great to be able to just be in community with you there at that march with so many others working towards the same cause. It was wonderful, and I'm super excited to be here tonight with you all. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So again, my name is Brittany Pope. I'm a social worker, and I am the Economic Security Supervisor at Bread for the City in Washington, DC. Bread for the City is an organization providing comprehensive services to those living with low incomes in DC. Bread for the City does a lot. So we're a health clinic, we have a social services department, a legal team, advocacy, a food pantry, and also a clothing program. So it's really a holistic organization. And our mission really is to help those in our community to uplift themselves and to determine the future of their own communities and lives. So Bread, yeah, we've had a journey into this GBI work. It started very early on in the pandemic. So the spring of 2020, where the executive directors and CEOs of 4 DC area nonprofits, Bread included, came together to talk about what could we do to ease the burden on of those specifically in Ward 7 and 8 in DC. And if you're not really familiar with the landscape of DC, Ward 7 and 8, the southeast quadrant of the city has been historically marginalized, not just like a location-wise, it's literally located across the Anacostia River, but resource-wise, it's a food desert over there. There's a lack of health resources. So these directors of those 4 agencies came together to develop a project called Thrive East of the River. And the goal was to support 500 families living in Ward 7 and 8, and to provide them with $5,500 of unconditional cash, as well as we wanted to make this a holistic pilot as well. So not just providing cash, but also grocery and dry goods delivery. Remember, this is like right at the beginning of the pandemic when there was a lot of fear about venturing out to the grocery store. Also providing legal support. One thing, I can talk all day and all night long about what goes into creating a GBI program, but one thing that many of the participants run into is something called the benefits cliff, where they accept the funds as being a part of the project, but it may affect their public benefits, their SNAP funds, their food stamps, Medicaid, TANF, disability. So we had our legal team at Bread for the City give one-on-one benefits counseling to the participants. So we just really wanted to connect the participants of Thrive with all of these resources. We also provided them and connected them with a resource navigator, someone to help them with employment and education resources. So Thrive was wildly successful. We actually surpassed our goal of 500 participants, and we were able to help 600 families with these funds. It was great. It's one of the largest privately funded GBI programs in the country. And Bread was just really inspired by this work that we decided to create the economic security team at Bread to continue on with projects of this sort. So currently, we are helping with cash distribution of a new program called Let's Go DMV. It's a project with, it's a cohort of 75 hospitality workers that lost their jobs during the pandemic, and they'll receive $1,000 a month for 5 years. So we are actually providing the cash distribution piece of the project, and also we provided that benefits counseling for the participants as well. So we are just jumping in with supporting these GBI projects in the DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, as well as working really closely with the DC GBI Coalition, which is a network of organizations, and it's led by Melody Webb of the Mothers Outreach Network, who is fantastic. We are really involved in advocacy work, advocating to the DC Council for more GBI funds, for protections around the benefits cliff issue. We're also trying to get our DC mayor to sign on to Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, to really share that that commitment to this work moving forward. We have been able to advocate both locally and federally. We advocated to HHS and HUD around benefits cliffs issues. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's really exciting work. And that I can totally share a link with you all about the outcomes from our Thrive East of the River project. We saw that participants' emotional and physical, mental well-being just increased and soared as being a part of the project. They were able to invest in their own communities. Some even used the funds to start their own businesses. This work, it actually works. This GBI work works. And we are really committed to changing the narratives around GBI and and those who receive the benefits. So again, I could talk all day and all night long about this work, but I know we have limited time. So yeah, thank you. Thank you all again for this opportunity to come speak and learn and be in community with you all.
Thanks, Brittany. I have a million questions for you. And also, I want to say to the participants, if you all are having questions, we're going to get to them. So you can type them in the chat if you want, but also just keep them in mind and we will get to them. Rich, can you share with us next?
Yes, hey y'all. Rich, sorry, I'm taking notes and like writing things down as well. When I'm on panels, I'm also like learning. And so part of what I will lift up and kind of ground us in, just to start, is that I want to lift up Johnny Tillman. She was a daughter of a sharecropper born in 1926 and went on to lead the National Welfare Rights Organization and advocated for guaranteed income in the late 60s, early 70s. Johnny is also the person who educated Martin Luther King on guaranteed income, which is why he came out earlier on discussing and advocating for guaranteed income. And also I want to lift up the Black Panther Party, who had guaranteed income or guaranteed employment as part of their 10-point program. And so I want to say that I think a lot of the work that is happening now around guaranteed income, it sits on the shoulders of our folks who have been doing this work for a very long time, but it's now propping up as a nuance and a new conversation. And I want, the folks that are on this call to understand and to know that this has historically been a radical movement that is now becoming more centrist and progressive in ways. And so we need to continue to make it radical by having radicals hold these interventions and remember that that they're ours to begin with. Again, Richard Wallace, founder of Equity and Transformation, also known as EAT in Chicago. We launched a guaranteed income pilot project solely for formerly incarcerated system impacted people. We have 30 formerly incarcerated people in a community. It's called West Garfield Park. The average per capita income in West Garfield Park is around $11,000 a year, nearly over $20,000 below the average per capita income in Chicago. You got a question, how can anyone survive on $11,000 a year in a city like Chicago, where the average rent is around $1,900 for a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartment, right? And so we decided that we wanted to kind of flip the script. We understand also that, our people they have limited access to programs and benefits because of the eligibility criteria. I wrote an op-ed on, systemic racism in Chicago, and I discussed that, racism in Chicago is much different than other places, and than in the South in some places. It's less explicit. It's more hidden in the eligibility criteria. One of those foremost markers is the conviction history, our background checks. And so it sounds very, very, very robust, all of these programs that exist, but then they do background checks and you find out that you're ineligible. So it's almost impossible. If you think about areas like West Garfield Park, we have a very, very high rate of recidivism, that if you create a program that—
Rich, could I interrupt you? I'm sorry, the interpreter I can't see them. So if you could just pause for 1 second to make sure that, there we go. Thank you.
Okay.
We'll be switching every 15 minutes if that helps, just to keep in mind. When we disappear is because we're switching every 15 minutes.
Right, and you don't need to stop the conversation because I'm already, yeah. I see where he stopped, and so I'll
okay, appreciate you.
Thank you guys.
No problem.
Okay, so I think what I was saying is that you can't create interventions to increase safety by excluding those who have done harm. right? And if you do, then you really leave no programs whatsoever for those people, right? And whatever, there's a broad range of what we call harm. And so we wanted to kind of flip the script and create a program that that in order for you to be eligible, you had to have been convicted of a particular, you've had to have been formally incarcerated in one way or another, right? And so we launched the Chicago Future Fund. I'm also, just to also highlight, I'm formerly incarcerated, spent 2 years in prison. And so for me, it hit home because I knew the impact of investment, right? I knew the difference between me and about 100 of the people that came out and came home from jail with me. The difference was that I had some social capital invested in me, right? And that through that social capital, I was able to get back into college. I was able to, get my license back, right? Pay back tickets and fines, all of those, those things that come with, life after incarceration. And for a lot of my folks, they didn't have that. And so that was the only difference. They were probably more intelligent than me, more brilliant than me, and they should be here right now. But in reality, there are very few interventions that actually hold those people and are built for those people. So those people like myself, is who I had in mind when we launched the Guaranteed Income Pilot Project. It is for young African Americans aged 18 to 35 in West Garfield Park. That same demographic has the highest rate of unemployment in West Garfield Park. That same demographic has the highest rate of being victims of gun violence in the city of Chicago. That same demographic has the highest rate of being perpetrators of violence in Chicago. And so for me, it was super important to focus the intervention where it mattered the most. And for us, that's where it mattered the most. And it's a study. It's looking at income. It's looking at it's looking at recidivism. It's looking at social mobility. It's looking at physical functioning, psychological wellness. And we do that by survey. So monthly, our participants take a 5-minute survey. It's a quantitative study, and it's also a qualitative study. Quarterly, the participants come in for an interview. And so our goal is to really take this study, take this, what we've learned from this, and use it to demand reparations for the war on drugs. The majority of our folks are participants. The participants of the program are survivors of the war on drugs. Equity and Transformation played a leading role in recreational cannabis legalization. We won that bill in 2019, and it was the first bill to incorporate reparations for the war on drugs. One of the biggest challenges with that bill to date is that there has been no means for compensation for survivors. We were able to get 25% of the cannabis tax revenue out of police pensions and into a fund. And so our goal is to turn that fund into a permanent guaranteed income fund for survivors of the war on drugs in the state of Illinois. And so that's a little bit about the program. Our long-term goal is to convert cannabis tax dollars into a permanent fund for survivors of the war on drugs in Illinois.
Hallelujah. Thank you. That's so exciting. And Evan, can you help us contextualize these programs in the bigger economic landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I think Rich's background in political history, the Welfare Rights Organization, the Black Panther Party does a lot of that. Greetings from the Bronx, everyone. My name is Evan. I work at an organization called the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative. That's not really entirely why I'm here. I'm a researcher and practitioner and supporter of solidarity economy and economic democracy work in New York City. I am here because I grew up visiting a woman in prison who recently was released. She was my mom's ex-girlfriend. She was in an armored truck robbery that resulted in the death of 2 police officers in Nyack in 1981. And she was in prison and given clemency, I believe it was 2019, right before COVID, by Governor Cuomo. And I visited her growing up with my family. I visited her every Christmas. And what I saw was that when she was released, and first of all, while she was inside, she had an entire community of people standing with her and supporting her, and through several decades, and supporting her family on the outside, supporting her inside. And that when she was getting ready to be released, she had an entire community of people mobilized to support her and provide her with the things that she was going to need to set up her life. She's an elder. She's in her late 60s, early 70s, I believe now, and has no work history, no social security that she's down on. And so the kinds of things that people need to survive every day are deeply exacerbated and made far more prominent and urgent for people returning from long prison sentences. And my parents and their community of folks who had been activists and anti-war activists and feminist queer liberation, allies and so forth going on in the 60s and 70s, provided that network of care and support to her. And I feel like what that modeled to me was something that, and I think where there's a tension and a challenge is, what is the obligation of the state? What is the obligation of a government to provide that? And what are our obligations to one another? Is a tension, I think, that we see play out in the way that basic income policies are played off against job guarantee policies. So you often hear like folks like tech billionaires and stuff being like, oh, well, basic income is the way to go. We just give everybody money, because they view it as a mechanism to dismantle other forms of assistance that are part of living in a society with people, other forms of public assistance, other forms of public goods that are provided by the government. Whereas on the other end, a job guarantee, and I think Rich said it very well, that these demands come out of radical movements that resist an economic system that's grounded in exploitation and violence, and that they can be adopted to stand for anything. These programs can be co-opted and made friendly, can be done in a variety of ways. But I think the thing about basic income is, as I think both Brittany and Rich are saying, is to look at who is doing it and why. Because a cash assistance program from the government, I think a lot of folks, I'll just say, I think a lot of folks can probably recognize that, like, if an elected official is giving out bags of groceries and calling it mutual aid, that's probably not really mutual. It might be aid, but it's not really mutual. They have a position of power and authority, and they're distributing food to people who need it. That's not a relationship of mutuality. It's assistance that people need to survive, but it's not mutual. And so I think we ought to, think about what those programs look like. That, do people need cash assistance? Yes. Should people have direct cash assistance that is not conditioned on any behavior or history? Yes. How they fit into movements for liberation and demands that help create additional space for justice and liberation is basically up to the people doing it. If it's a mutual aid tool as part of community building and movement building, then it has extremely radical potential. If it's part of making demands on a state for repair, then it is, it is placing the system and its contradictions in full view. If it's done to dismantle other programs, then it's not really mutual or supportive. And so I think that we're in a context now where certain ideas gain popularity and traction, but they can also be used as part of a bait and switch, which is why the movement building component of the work is so essential, is that you have to continuously make explicit those connections between what we say should be basic and essential versus what other people would say is, well, you can just give people money and then you don't have to worry about the other stuff. And I think you hear a lot of this kind of stuff from people who have an interest in dismantling the other things as well. And so it's just, as part of this conversation, I don't think maybe that's not confusing or that's not an issue that other folks are dealing with, but in community and conversations around this with folks to keep some of those contradictions in mind as these things gain popularity.
Thanks, Evan. Thank you. This is Etta. I am brimming with questions, but I don't want all of my questions to be the ones that we talk about. Dustin and I did generate some questions. There was a question from Devin that asks, what are some of the barriers that you all have come up against at the beginning of the GBI work? How did you get over those barriers, and how did you navigate them if you didn't get past them? And I'm looking at Brittany and Evan.
And this is
Yeah, I can
Dustin
go
too. I'm gonna drop that in the chat and add like, yo, what are the traps? Like, I think that's a concern that we have is like, what are the traps of the nonprofit industrial complex of the government to co-opt things? So I'll put that whole question in the chat.
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier that we ran into from the beginning in implementation of Thrive is the benefits cliff issue. Most of our participants in Thrive were receiving one or a combination of public benefits, and they really had to make a decision. Would accepting this $5,500 be worth it if they would lose Medicaid benefits for however long? So that's a decision that participants really shouldn't have to make. We're not trying to penalize those who would benefit from these projects. We want to help to uplift them. So to navigate around those issues, we again had one-on-one counseling for each participant so that they were able to make an informed decision over whether they wanted to participate in the project. But from an advocacy standpoint, we've done a lot of like outreach to DC Council around this issue to try to get some legislation or a bill written so that we can protect recipients of these projects. It's really a shame to have to decide between accepting this gift and losing their other social safety net programs. Another barrier we ran into was just the narratives around guaranteed income. I mean, the first questions that I would get when I talked to someone about Thrive was, how do you know that this money is going to be spent in a positive way? And what does that question say about those who receive the funds or are participants of the program? So really breaking down the stigma of just guaranteed income as a whole and recipients of guaranteed income was something that we really had to face head on in planning and implementing Thrive.
Brittany, I just have a follow-up question for you. Dustin and I met with, I actually forget their name, but they are a group LA-based that does back-end technology. Actually, I think they work with you, Rich. They do like back-end technology for GBI projects, like, organizing the pay. We should find that link because if others on this call are interested, they actually have built out this whole technology where they can pay people pretty logistically easily. But that person told us that, because I asked that question when we were first researching it, and he said that people were allowed to receive up to $15,000 a year as a charitable donation and that it shouldn't impact their benefits.
Yeah, so each jurisdiction is different. DC is its own special case. We aren't a state yet. So we're really sort of beholden to DC Council and also in a wider sense, like the federal government around what we could, like the amount that we could claim as a gift. But it's really hard when the social safety net programs are a mix of local and federal benefits. For example, disability benefits. If someone's on SSI, they can only, I think, have an income of no more than $1,200 a month, and they can only have no more than I think around $2,000 worth of assets. So if they go above that amount, that their benefits are terminated. Those are ridiculously low amounts. And that's a federal program. So it's just, it put a lot of stress on the participants to sort of navigate the rules of all the different programs if they receive multiple benefits. So it was stressful for the participants and for those of us planning the projects, because we had to keep our eye on, like, what are the federal rules, the state or city rules, and it did feel like a trap a lot of the time. And also we would hear different things from different people. So it was super hard to know which way to go, and also to make sure that we were advising the participants correctly.
Thanks, Brittany. Rich, I'm curious, I really appreciated how you use the word intervention in talking about your program. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate more on connecting the work to reparations. And also, it seemed like your program was working with a smaller group of people than the 500 families. And I'm curious, one thing that I'm afraid of, because our community that we work with is family, like we were talking about before we got on the call, like we're even like our community inside of prison, it's like we have complicated relationships like friend circles and communities do, and there's jealousy that happens even like inside the prison, and money makes things weird. And so yeah, first question is about just like connecting it to reparations, but then also, do you have any experience with navigating relationships and money?
Oh, that's a hard one. The first one's a lot easier. Connecting to reparations is a lot easier than the last part. So I think for me, I think one thing that I noticed, again, so we launched our guaranteed income pilot after we had gotten out of the pandemic, and through the pandemic, we got introduced to guaranteed income through our mutual aid work. So we're doing direct financial assistance throughout the pandemic. And I really think that's how guaranteed income kind of surfaced into national discussion, because there was so much cash that was being handed out through nonprofit, grassroots organizations, et cetera. So the connection that we had is that when I entered the guaranteed income space, it was definitely not radical, but yet, and it wasn't targeted, right? Like there was this large fight for like universal basic income, but they were using statistics that were derived specifically from people who had experienced particular harms, right, by the state, right? So these harms look like the war on drugs. These harms look like redlining. These harms look like mass incarceration. These harms look like slavery, right? The legacy of slavery and Jim Crow laws. And they were using statistics like the racial wealth gap, the unemployment statistics, all which were created by particular harms, right, by the state. And so they were using these statistics that were like, so say for instance, the unemployment statistics and the housing or you know the per capita incomes in particular communities to defend the need. That was their argument for guaranteed income, when actually that is actually an argument for reparations, right? And so for me, it is not about guaranteed income. This larger conversation around guaranteed income is important in reference to the defense for compensation for the compensation. So we use the UN's definition of reparations. So I need to be clear about that. There's 5 pillars to the UN's definition of reparations. There's rehabilitation, restitution, compensation, satisfaction, and a guarantee of non-repetition. Did I say that? Yeah. So those are the 5 pillars for the UN's definition of reparations. Compensation is one component of it, right? A lot of people think it's just compensation. It's just a bag. It's not. It's all of those other things, right? And so for us, when we see these direct cash payments, and this, just to note, there was $1.7 trillion that have been since like 2019 that have been used in the form of guaranteed income in cash and subsidies, right? So the child care tax credit, et cetera, all of these are cash programs. I'm trying to speed up because I know we ain't got a lot of time. In our analysis, that really serves as a foundation for defense for reparations. Where we sit and where we're situated in Illinois, cannabis is $1 billion industry. Cannabis came from historically Black and brown communities, right? Like this legacy market that existed. And so for us, for survivors of the war on drugs, you can't get to cannabis equity without paying back what you have stolen from these communities, right? And so we had legislators stand on stages and talk about, this is about reparations, and so we're holding them to the fire around reparations, right? There's this conversation that's happening around guaranteed income. I'm trying to be very brief. Guaranteed income that is not intersecting with the harms that have occurred before the guaranteed income can exist, right? You get what I'm saying? Like, their guaranteed income starts at like a level of equity, right? It starts at right here, but you have people that are way down here that have never gotten their job. You get what I'm saying? Like, you can't, hopefully that makes sense, right? Like, you can't get there without, first, repairing the harms that pre-existed the income. You get what I'm saying? So that's like our analysis and where we're fighting from. And we think that we have a pathway for it because we're able to get that carve out in the cannabis policy preemptive to this this intervention that we're fighting.
We didn't get to the jealousy relationship question.
So real quick, the way we dealt with that is that we had a randomized control study. So that meant that all of the names went into a basket and we selected 30. And so that way it is like, we didn't choose. It wasn't like we prioritized anybody. Everybody had access and we did a randomized control study. So that means that I didn't personally select my favorite people, nor did anyone in our organization. That may help.
Yeah, this is Dustin. As Rich said that, I'm just like, how could we apply that? And I'm just like, I'm not sure. And also, like, a bit of our deliberations has been about, like, do we give it to people inside now? And it's not just like people coming home, which complicates it further. But I want to transition to Evan real quick and like think about like Evan, like there's been these, like, as we were researching, like we found like a bunch of projects like in Fresno and Denver most recently of GBI projects that local governments were doing. And I guess like our question is like, how do you do this shit like really wrong? And also like, what are the things that need to like go hand in hand with like, because I think like Rich like talked about like, the reparations piece needs to be a part of the GBI in order for it to actually be like really effective. And Rich is talking about specifically for Black people in West Side of Chicago. Like, so what is that? Like, what else needs to be paired with that? Is it participatory governance? Is it like some type of democracy? Yeah, just like, I guess if you can put it into context, like what needs to happen for the GBI to be effective, and also just like, I guess, like, what are your takes on like the local, like the government programs?
Yeah, I think, Rich, using the UN definition of reparations, I think really helps clarify the conversation a lot, because in the United States, we're also now seeing something that has also been patterned in history, which is private or local local government or private institutions offering reparations for harm. And it usually is like nowhere near like churches, for example, or local governments. Like I think Evanston actually said that they were going to try to pilot some kind of reparations program, right? And they don't really, I think, if you get to what Rich was saying about definitions of reparation, they don't fit the bill. So they're assistance, right? Again, to go back to like kind of what I was saying before, it's like a form of assistance, but they're calling it reparations when it doesn't fit the bill. I personally would just say, like, I don't know about going wrong. Like the Denver example that you mentioned and some of the local examples, like calling something reparations, the federal government, for many things in the United States, the federal government is the responsible party for things that we would consider in need of reparations. Things that Rich mentioned, redlining, right? Genocide, settler colonialism, theft of land. The federal government is the party responsible. So directing the claim of reparations to, or for a local government to say we're offering reparations, like you have to, they're not the ones really who are responsible. What you then get is the possibility that they're defraying or unraveling movements by offering things that are not at the scale of what's needed. I think so. I personally am not going to say that it's wrong, because it's experimentation and learning, right? If it comes out of a movement gaining a concession or a movement gaining something that provides unrestricted resources to people who need it, even on a temporary basis, that to me doesn't suggest wrong. Like, are there better ways to do it than bad? But I don't want to get into like oh, should Denver not give whatever $1,500 a month to folks who are experiencing homelessness? No, I think they should. Like, they shouldn't do it temporarily, and they shouldn't do it to a limited number of people. But that's right. But like, I don't know if that's a wrong thing. I think that the question and the tensions that it raises is like, what else is happening and what else is being demanded. And Rich's point about like the foundation of what is needed and required is so much deeper than what is often being pitched as these income guarantee programs. And that ultimately is part of what I think hopefully continues to be surfaced, that in each of these experiments that gets monitored and evaluated and the results are almost always very positive, that mountain of evidence continues to show that the depth of what is owed is significantly bigger than $1,000 a month. And there is an example also from Detroit, the Black Economic Development Conference, which was a coalition of Black freedom groups that met in Detroit, and one of the guys there released a manifesto, and the manifesto was a $500 million plan for reparations, and it included a lot of things. It included $20 million for a Black labor strike fund. It included $30 million for a research skills center, $10 million for job training, right? $80 million for basically a community land bank in the South to establish cooperative farms. All of these things from this conference and this idea were the foundations of the kind of economy that would be required, right, to begin reparations. On top of that, a basic income starts to meet the needs that people have. It just occurred to me to bring up this. The book is from a book, the work is from a book called Detroit, I Do Mind Dying. And it was actually connected to the National Welfare Rights Organization as well that Rich mentioned. So this is a long-standing set of tensions and demands that have been made. But fundamentally, it's about what kind of economy, right? You can't just give people cash and say they've been repaired. People need a lot more than cash to be repaired.
Can I say one thing just real quick to Evan's point? Like, so our cannabis policy also included like 800,000 expungements. That's the most important. That's the meat and potatoes. Like the carve out for 25%, like compensation alone, it does not fit the bill. You are 100% correct. It is not. We can't be. Yeah, we shouldn't misinterpret what we're doing if it's not like tied to something that's much longer. And we are also an anti-capitalist organization. Like, we understand that wholeheartedly. The way that our people get free is to end capitalism, right? And so that is also part of this, and I think that the people in power, the one thing they don't want is for our people to have time, and giving people cash affords them time. And that time can be used to help politicize, educate, mobilize people. And so for us, we think about it in that way, and we think about the broader, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is an intervention within a nonprofit structure, right? We're talking about like what are we actually building towards, right? This intervention creates a pathway to time. And that time we can use to politicize our people, mobilize our people to do and to change the world into the way that they would like it.
Okay, cool. This is Dustin, and I see people are exiting the space and dropping stuff in the chat. We appreciate you for letting us know how you're exiting the space. And it's not with like no harm done. So as you do that, we appreciate it. And yeah, thank you to Brittany and Evan and Rich for like kicking it with us, spending time and like just really coming through on like just like on the arm, like, yo, yes, we'll show up to this. Because like we really in like a learning phase around this. And I think like as we were talking about earlier, it was just like, yo, like at the core of this shit is like, what does it mean like when you just like down and you broke and like you actually need it for like somebody to like actually like, you know, provide something for you. And there's levels of solidarity and there's like politics that we can connect this to, which obviously we do. We're situated in that context of like people pushing for abolition. But like at the core of it, it's like, yo, like, what does that mean when that shit comes through for you when you really need it? And like, we're hoping this is like, you know, something like that. So whatever you could share with folks, you know, and also any support like folks want to give, any ideas, like we're all open and welcome to that shit. Like we are literally attempting to build this program and also hoping that it like seeds something. I mean, specifically, you know, for Southwest Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania in specific, but maybe, you know, other people could use what we're doing as example in the same way that we've used National Council, Rich's program, Brittany's program, for that. So yeah, we appreciate y'all as you actually just like maybe like, you know, ask yourself that. Etta, I don't know if I'm missing anything. I feel like our grounding was like much more prolific when we talked about it than what I'm saying right now.
No, you're singing the good word. I feel excited. I took notes. I still have a lot of questions. Brittany, that new initiative that you all are working on where you're dropping $1,000 a month on 75 people, that sounds substantial. That sounds awesome. Let's go DMV. That's what you called it. Yeah, and just the framing, you know, Andrea James, who does the Community Love Project. I'm expecting you guys to start leaving as I'm talking. If the audience wants to leave, feel free to do that. But Andrea James, who I called and she picked up, which is always so amazing to me that people pick up their phones. And she recommended that book I put in the chat, Give a Man a Fish. And actually one of my dear friends in prison read it for me because it was too academic for me and wrote me a book report. But that's like a global analysis of guaranteed basic income programs, which is really, it's dense. But she also said, Rich, she was like, you go get those marijuana people, you go get their money. And she was talking about like trying to, you know, really find out who's making money off marijuana in your area and redirecting those funds into supporting people coming home from prison and, you know, the work to end mass incarceration. So I feel very encouraged. I really appreciate all of your time. And Rich, Brittany, Evan, for you being, you know, clear. I get really confused. So I really appreciated you clarifying stuff. I'm looking at y'all, people in the chat leaving. I don't know, should we do like a ceremony to end? Should we sometimes?
This is Dustin. Maybe we should just say like goodbye to people.
Okay.
that could be like the in-person replication ceremony.
I mean, I have done the thing where we all click the end button at the same time. And Shabaka, I see you. I'm so happy that you're here. You're muted, bud. But that's okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. So
How you doing?
I'm good. Most part.
Cool. You have any input on this conversation?
No, not right now. I have some ideas, but need to work them out a little bit more in detail to have this conversation.